Hey, hello, hello. How y'all doing? Thanks for joining in. Hope you can hear me and see me just fine. Just checking in. We should be live right now on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So if you join in, just let me know where you're calling in from, and can you hear me and see me just fine? I would love to hear from you. Okay. And as the folks are joining in, we also have a question of the day for you. You're going to see it down below here in the panel. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about internship? So put those thoughts in the chat, and do you consider that a real job? And if so, should it be paid? Like, again, what's your consideration about it? We're going to talk about that later in the presentation, but I'm wondering what you think. And as you dial in, let me know where you're calling in from, what is the time of the day, and is it warm or cold in your part of the globe? I'm here in North Texas, in Dallas. It's noon, it's 12:02 p.m., and it's pretty warm day today, so I'm looking forward to it. It's almost like, I guess, 25 Celsius, and it's around 80 Fahrenheit, so it's a beautiful day. Cool, so Dana is saying she's joining from Spain, and as folks are joining in, okay, Hannah's saying, Ottawa, can you hear me? USA. Awesome. Thanks for joining in, folks. Today we're going to be talking about a very important topic, and I frankly can't think of anyone who sort of really may afford of not thinking about their BA career or a job search at some point. So it's really important. And as we've seen what's going on with the market right now, with all the kind of turbulence, it's really hard to stay aside. So I really wanted to have a session dedicated to this particular topic. And if it happens to be your first event that you're attending from BA Career Mentor, that my special welcome comes to you. My name is Sergey Shimansky, and I've been doing business analysis for pretty much all my career, for more than 20 years now. And even though my job titles have changed and the roles have changed, I've been privileged enough to work with various brands, large and small, and also traveled a lot and really live a happy professional life, fulfilling life. And that's where I came to understanding you can really happen to live a happy professional life as a BA. You don't necessarily need to jump in and from to other roles and can really consider the BA as just a stepping stone. And I do believe that you can live a happy professional life as a BA. And that is what my mission is with BA Career Mentor. I'm here to give you my knowledge and help you succeed in this market through my educational courses and packages, and also through the mentoring experience. So do me a favor, go out and check out bacareermentor.com. That's the website I have. And underneath resources, you're going to find a ton of free materials. One of them is going to be another career development webinar that's going to be really good supplementary to this one. And there are a lot of downloadable materials like discovery checklist, Scrum checklist, other video lectures. So do me a favor, check it out. Also, if you have not yet connected with me on LinkedIn or YouTube, please check out my YouTube channel. You're going to do me a huge favor if you subscribe to it, because there'll be much more new videos coming on YouTube, specifically on the topic of BA job search, interviews, and hiring tips and things like that. And also, if we're not yet connected on LinkedIn, feel free to send me a connection request or just follow me, whatever works best for you. I'll be happy to stay connected and stay in touch. So just kind of checking in on our chat, what we have here. Folks are joining, Dallas, and yeah, sounds good. Edmonton, it's snowing down there. Well, I imagine, I'm wondering how snowy it is and how cold it is, because I'm I used to be pretty familiar with like snowing weather and things like that, because I'm from Eastern Europe myself, but I'm probably just spoiled by this warm and nice Dallas weather here. Okay, now as we go, feel free to post your comments in the chat and questions in the chat. I encourage it to be really lively event. And if you happen to be watching this as a recording, do the same. You may reach out to me if you have any follow-up questions. I'll be happy to talk with you. And I want you to also feel free to respond to other people's questions. So let it be a more of a lively discussion there. Okay. Now, if that sounds good, again, I wanna understand, what is your opinion on internship? Because I used to have kind of mixed feelings about this, and especially whether it should be paid or not. But I came to kind of my terms to it, and I'm going to share my thoughts on that later in this presentation. But let me know what you think. Internship. Maybe you're currently an intern or you have an intern in your organization. Again, it doesn't have to be your organization's kind of standpoint, but your personal feeling toward internship, especially on whether or not it should be paid. And of course, if you happen to be an intern right now, again, what are your thoughts on this? Okay. Good. Now, there's only so little you can put into a meaningful presentation, and again, even conversation, especially on the topic of the job search, because it's endless. So I wanted to really pack it in with the most useful things, especially those things where I see a lot of BAs really struggling with, and it is understanding of the structural process of various steps in the hiring workflow that as a BA, you just need to be aware of and therefore adjust your behaviors depending on where you're at in this workflow. We're going to talk about that. We specifically will talk about the application strategy that I believe is the most productive and useful for you if you're currently looking for a job, specifically answering the question of how many applications like a day you should be submitting and things like that. We'll look at a very specific, real specific examples of job postings, and I'm going to talk through some of the specific recommendations that I have for you that you may employ while optimizing your resume, like specific keywords and things that you need to put into your resume to get noticed. And of course, we're going to talk about quite a few myths, and I'll try to debunk those myths for you and again, explain my thought process. Okay. Now, that sounds good. If that's what you're here for, put yes in the chat. I'm going to scan through again if there are any questions or reflections thus far. Again, if that sounds like a right agenda, put that in a chat and we'll confirm on that. Okay. Now, as always, a little disclaimer here. Everything that I will be talking about today represents my point of view and the educational business that I own, BA Career Mentor. It does not represent any points of view of organizations I've ever worked for. So I hope that makes sense. Now, before we jump to the topic, I really want to share a story that I had once. It was pre my EPAM days in my previous organization where I played the role of a hiring manager, and I was in tons of interviews, as you can imagine. But that one interview really stood out for me. It was with a candidate who, previously, they submitted their resume, and looking at the resume, you could tell, they experienced BA, and there were certain keywords and everything. So I thought, yeah, that should be a really good match. But then during the interview, you could tell that the person was really kind of, I would say, rejecting the whole idea of interviewing. Like, I think that individual was just feeling entitled that she deserves that job. And even though, we'll talk about that, I also share the idea of everybody should be able to give an opportunity. But in that specific case, it was just a no-go due to many red flags that we as a team identified at that process. And that made me really thinking about how come there could be a really, knowledgeable individual, strong BA that probably knows a lot of stuff, just unwilling to maybe, collaborate with others or, feeling even in need to kind of sell their expertise to an employer. So I felt really awkward about it. And I kind of encountered similar situations in the future after that. But that one experience really stood out with me, and that made me thinking that I believe still a lot of education is needed, across overall BA community on what is the right way to really navigate that intricate process of finding a job as a BA. And again, another thing that really kind of stands with me, that I truly believe, this is one of my core beliefs, that everybody should be able to get a job. I truly believe that. It doesn't necessarily matter, the compensation level, things like that may vary, but I truly believe that everybody should be given this opportunity. That's again why I believe it's important to spread the word about the processes and what's the right way to navigate those. And with that being said, I actually don't think it's a good idea, maybe just from a moral standpoint, again, my own personal opinion, to consider internship to be an unpaid kind of gig, right? It's like an educational. I do get they understand that the company is going to invest that time of their employees to teach others, but if that's real work that's being conducted and carried out, then there should be payment. That's my understanding. I'm wondering, what are y'all thinking? I'm going to highlight a few comments here before we jump into looking at the very specific workflow that I'm going to be talking about today. Now, if I may just highlight this one, internship being a job depends. You actually get hands-on experience. It's hard for most businesses financially to pay. And yeah, I understand where you're coming from, again, from the business standpoint. Yeah. If it's a year, then it's not okay. Then a month, yeah, maybe manageable. Yeah, I think we're just all coming from this situation where it just happens to be as such, and we try to maybe find justification of why this practice actually exists. And then Dana is saying, I do consider an internship a real job. Yeah. Ideal internship should be paid. Yeah. Again, I'm kind of coming from the same positions because I feel like, it's awkward to kind of have, maybe, an intern, like a student, to work at an organization doing real work and then not being paid, and kind of having that individual like to find a side gig in Chick-fil-A or McDonald's and wait tables and stuff like that. But anyways, let's kind of jump right to our workflow today. I'm going to walk you through a typical BA hiring process and workflow that may be adjusted in various organizations, but across the industries, we consultants and professionals look at this workflow to be more or less the same for BAs and actually other professions as well. And it's a multi-step process. The reason why I'm bringing this to you is you don't need to think that, just having an awesome resume and you applying for like tens, jobs a day will land you a job. It is your understanding of where you are at the process. Let's say with company A, you're in the screening stage, or with company B, currently with the hiring interview. This should make you adjust your strategies, the way you present yourself, what you say, and what artifacts you present about yourself, and also about how many efforts you need to be putting into each of these various kind of flows of hiring. So that's why I think it's important to really understand where you're at in the process. So we're going to start with sourcing, and think about it from an employer standpoint. Whenever they have a job opening, they feel like there's a project coming in or there's an initiative that's coming in and will be opened, they need to staff their internal team, right? And oftentimes they're thinking about either hiring or hiring a consultant, or bringing some internal resources. But if there's a decision to hire from the outside, first and foremost, they're reaching out either to internal recruiters or their networking partners for recruiting, because you'll all know that oftentimes many organizations don't handle recruiting themselves. They partner with other outsourcing organizations, and therefore those recruiting partners will be what we call sourcing, actually scanning through their various lists of contact lists, who might be interested, and things like that. Obviously, when you apply for a position via the website or Indeed.com or LinkedIn, you get to that bucket as well. But you need to understand there could be various kind of buckets or categories of potential candidates that might be eligible for the job. Obviously, then at later stages, recruiters and the hiring managers will kind of scan through and narrow down the list to the most eligible candidates. But in the beginning, it's like the top of the funnel. Everybody who might be, remotely eligible, kind of fill in. That's why it's also important to understand that, yes, ATS is a reality of nowadays, and you therefore need to be really optimizing your resume and your profile to match the keywords and also to have it in a more structured way. We're going to talk about that later in the presentation, but it's a good idea to have, bullet lists in your resume, to have it submit PDF or Word format, because those most likely, if the organization uses ADS, will be supplied to the ADS for further kind of machine parsing. And I hope that makes sense. As I'm talking through it, I'm going to kind of jump to the next step in the process here, and we'll also scan through the questions if there are any questions thus far in our chat. Now, the next step obviously is the screening itself. And think about, again, of it from the recruiter standpoint. Oftentimes, they receive so many applications and potential candidates a day, they only have so little time to really dedicate to your particular application and your particular resume. I heard like a number, like maximum 10 seconds that recruiter invests in looking at your resume. So you only have like 10 seconds to impress with your resume. And by saying impress, I'm actually meaning to kind of deserve that right, to deserve that opportunity for next step, which is recruiter contacting you and potentially having a conversation with you, which is a recruiting or screen interview. But that first step of you really tailoring your resume to match the keywords, and as I was saying, to have as many kind of bullet points and structural information as possible, that is crucial here, especially considering the fact that recruiters are oftentimes paid on the basis of how many eligible candidates they're able to find, and therefore, again, it is in their best interest to find that eligible candidate. So help them. If you see certain keywords in the job posting, like mentioning Jira, Azure DevOps, or user stories, stakeholders, put those words one-to-one in your resume. And we'll talk about that right now as I'm going to scan through some of the examples of very real job postings that I want to walk you through. And again, can I share my thought process of what I think you can do in order to optimize your resume to match certain positions. Okay, you ready for that? Now, there were a few examples I was scanning through just the other day in the area close to where I live, where I just kind of went in and said, hey, I'm wondering what are the business analyst positions that are out there I may look at. And I had a few, and I think I only have 3 that I'm presenting today, but still, I'm wanting to show you the variety of various keywords and requirements that job posting kind of have. Like in this particular case, this organization mentioned they're interested in a BA who has experience in analyzing current state, or like as is or future state of business process. So my recommendation would be, if that's the position you would want to apply, have this like specific saying in writing in your resume. Yes, that implies that you need to submit various versions of your resume for various job postings, but that's exactly what the successful job search is all about. You will have to actually tailor your resume and very specific artifacts that you're submitting along with your resume to match the requirements. Because again, thinking about it from an employer standpoint, but also from the recruiter standpoint, they're receiving the resume where it says, instead of technical business analyst, something like system analyst. And them not being, professional in our area, it's hard for them to even determine whether the resume that they received from you really match to that job listing. And sometimes, in fear of supplying the wrong candidate, ineligible candidate further, they might just reject you, especially if at the same time they receive other resume where it says technical business analyst, even if it could be like technical business analyst too, like to the point where your resume clearly states the title you're applying as it is written in job posting. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, the closer you get with your resume at this very first stage to match the title and the keywords, the better. And I hope that makes sense. Now, the other one, the other job posting here, I believe that was with T-Mobile. And granted, again, I'm not affiliated and it's all publicly available information, but I would assume that in such a large organization, you could have various departments and projects, all of them imply their own specific requirements and needs. And therefore, for this one in particular, I'm seeing strategic business information system, or SharePoint I'm seeing here, right? SQL skills, Microsoft Office, technical writing. Again, if I was in the position of looking at this job and feeling, I'm pretty confident I could be a good match, I would go ahead and pick up my current version of the resume, look it up, and just trying to find ways to put in those keywords at the summary and also in the description of my detailed experience, right? And Power BI here as well, and data analysis. Again, it looks like this particular position requires someone to be technical enough, and I'm just wondering if that's something that they imply in other similar roles in the organization. And again, as far as the title of in your resume, right after your name, I would recommend you just put in right away, Senior Analyst Business Systems. Again, to make less of the kind of wiggle room for a recruiter to think whether or not you're a match. So just after the submission, they should feel like, yeah, you're the best match out there. So again, you can go wrong with just adding as many keywords as possible in your resume. Okay. Now, just looking at the chat here, are there any upcoming questions here? Now, and there's one more here. This one for the ISD, which is Independent School District. Now, granted, there's, it's a very, very, very specific business domain, right? And therefore, that particular job requires, ERP, and there's some public educational management systems here, software. Again, the same principle. If you want to work for the ISD and that's something that is of your interest, I would want you to look through that job posting and the keywords and really make sure that you have those keywords really spread across your resume, and also ideally the most important ones really put in the summary of your profile. Okay. Hope that makes sense. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about that approach? And like, if you're currently in the position of, really looking for a job, what do you think about that approach of really scanning through the resume and putting things in match with the job posting? Okay. And as we go through our next steps here, again, remember, it's always a multi-step process. And obviously various companies may have it to various, degrees of complexity. Oftentimes, before your resume really is put forward and presented to the hiring team, because they're busy. Those are other BAs and other product managers and technical directors and whatnot doing their job. They only have very limited time to really dedicate to this hiring process. So oftentimes, kind of the most of the work on screening happens to be conducted by the recruiting team. And in order to make sure that they feel safe, the recruiter feels safe to present you as an eligible candidate after they looked at your resume and they did see the match, like with the title and the keywords, they still want to clarify some specific points. And oftentimes, it is not to learn more about you and your profile. It is much more important for them to identify any potential red flags. And those red flags oftentimes really depend on the culture of the organization. However, some of them seem to be like omnipresent. And even though it may sound strange, especially in this time and age, in this very turbulent market situation, job hopping, this may raise questions, especially, if there's no clear indication why you're changing jobs way too often. So that may be a question you need to be ready to tell a story about that. Also, one of the questions that most likely will be asked is your salary expectations. And you should be ready to answer that question right away. It shouldn't be, well, I need to think, or I don't know, and things like that. You should have your story ready to answer that question. Now, you can talk about the range. You can ask and elicit the information about the range that they're able to pay for. But there should be some kind of a number, or at least a range put forward. Because otherwise, again, it's sort of a red flag. Because, again, from an employer standpoint, it might mean that they will invest time in talking with you, and you may really appear a wonderful candidate, but then, at the end of the day, they will not be able to match your expectations. So that's why it's important to have that information really early on, so that that question is not standing in the way of further process. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And by the way, tell me what has been your experience of communicating those expectations early on, and whether or not you had a situation where that particular question was, again, either played against you, or you felt maybe lowballed at the end, even though you suggested certain number up front. Okay, good. Now, there's another question or point here. I just want to bring that. How much detail would you recommend going into for each keyword listed in the job posting when tailoring a resume. Now, there's no necessarily like a good kind of percentage, I would say, but I try to recommend to my mentees, right, to have, for those positions you really like, you feel like, you really would be a good fit here, like 80% of the important keywords to measure in. And oftentimes it's only manually scanning through it. You can identify what is important, what is not. Oftentimes technical things like SQL and Power BI would be must-haves for that particular position. So put those in. You don't necessarily need to write and explain everything you did with such particular technology or the keyword, but the keyword must be there. Once you get an opportunity to jump on a call, the recruiter call or the hiring manager call, then you'll be able to elaborate. But first, it's sort of like knocking on the door saying, yes, I've been working with this technology, or I've been leading the stakeholder management groups and things like that, just, using those keywords. And again, your job at this stage is to kind of get that right, or the opportunity to be moved to the next step, which is the interviewing process. Okay. Another question here from Dana. I asked about red flags to recruiter here in Spain, and she said, I think red flags are the same everywhere. Bad attitude, being late for the interview, not researching for the company, a very good one, or client beforehand. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll actually talk about that particular topic, your research or your homework that you do prior to the interview, which to me is one of those critical things that you just must do before the hiring interview. Okay, so let's jump on it right now. Now, if everything goes right and you, in your process, in your workflow, you get invitations to the recruiter interview or screen interviews, then it's already a sign that you're doing something right. Okay. Now, ideally, you want to get to the point where right after the screening interview, like you have the invitation to the hiring interview. And oftentimes it is a multi-step process in itself. It is rarely that we see that it's just, one interview with a hiring manager, and then you get an offer, but ideally. Oftentimes, again, especially for like the senior BA roles or the lead BA roles, there could be multiple steps in the process. It also depends on whether or not you're applying for a consulting organization or just, the product company, or being part of an in-house internal IT team. But still, you have to be prepared for certain questions, like, obviously very technical ones, where you have to explain how did you use Jira, how you used discovery methods or stakeholder engagement, right? Or various types of documentation that you used. And that's where you might be asked to even put together some, some materials in front of the group. So I heard about, again, one of my mentees, they were asked to put together user story right in the interview process and kind of explain their thought process, which I think really makes sense. So you have to be ready for very fundamental conversations about your particular skills. However, it might happen that during those conversations you will also be kind of listened to, and there might be questions about overall your attitude, and so your presentation of certain maybe stories that explain, how good the worker you are, and also how well you collaborate with others. It's really important as well. And overall, I believe in the power of a really good story. Oftentimes, a good story may replace or maybe even cover for some lack of technical knowledge. Let's say, again, you were asked about, stakeholder management skills of yours, or the situation where you manage the scope creep or change request. Even haven't had, really vast experience in that sphere, but having some kind of a story that you can tell that really has, a challenge, like a really problematic situation with, the stakeholders bombarding you with various change requests, and how you stepped in and how you helped to sort of things out, even on the lowest scale, but showing some kind of this emotional aspect where you really care about this situation, how you solved it. That really helps to cover, again, for situation where you feel like there's a lack of expertise that you can demonstrate. Now, it is crucially important, and you can never miss that part, is to have your homework done for that organization. Again, It may be a consulting company, or it may be a product development company. It may be an in-house IT. It is important to understand what that company does, right? What's the business? And during the presentation, as you answer the question, again, you maybe ask the question about how you used user stories or use cases or various types of diagrams. It is important to find a way in your answer to kind of weave in the notion of, hey, I think that that method or that notation really makes sense for your organization, because let's say I went on your website and I figured you do certain projects where I believe that would make sense. Or I scanned your YouTube channel. Oftentimes, modern companies do have their YouTube channels where they talk about some achievements, and you can say, "Hey, I was really impressed by what you did there, or certain awards that you gained as your organization, and I truly believe that's important, and I believe that's how my skills may match your level expectations," and things like that. So the more relevance you can bring in your answers to what the company does, the better it is for you. Because at the end of the day, you want to make a really good impression. And it is those kind of emotional attachments that you fit in and kind of weave into your storytelling and answers that help you to be remembered by the interviewing team. So when the interview is done, and let's say they interview 5 other candidates, when they debrief on those candidates, they will be thinking about and talking about things that they remember, things that stood out. And those stories that you tell, they stand out. And how you bring the notion of, hey, you watched the YouTube channel, or you looked at the company's website, or scanned through the white papers of their projects, that will really help you stand out. Okay. Again, also given obviously the fact that you can answer those technical questions on your resumes and things like that, but it's super important to do your homework. Okay. Now I'm looking through some other questions here, and then Vol is saying, prepare your range per day, per month, in a year. Absolutely, that's a good point. Yes, depending on the country and the industry, yeah, you may be asked about the hourly rate or yearly salary, and again, different currencies. That's a very good call out, Vol. Okay. Now Gabrielle saying, I have always submitted a standard CV for all roles without minding the keywords. Good. Okay, and I'm just wondering again, what are y'all's thoughts about having multiple versions of your resume? So kind of multiple baseline resumes, which those in turn tailor to specific roles. Like you may have a generalist BA resume, and you may have, let's say, consultant BA, and then product BA, something like this, or like technical BAs, BA SA, and some kind of our business domain related SA. Or BA. So I'm wondering what are your thoughts on this. Okay. Stanislav is asking, are case studies common in interviews? I would say yes, because oftentimes in the behavioral part of the interview, you were asked a question on how did you navigate certain conflict, or how did you navigate certain situation with change requests coming your way, or other situations. And it is through a story or case study that you are able to tell and answer this question. So yes, I would say it's very common. Okay. Now, sounds good. Now, interestingly enough, there's certain questions that kind of pop up every single day in interviews. And again, oftentimes what I do with my students and my mentees is that we practice answers to those questions. And I have recently had a student who at the time was looking for a job, and then they find a job. And the question we practiced for like at least 3 sessions was about telling about yourself, right? You can't think of how many times that first feeling of it's not a match is coming through the tell us about yourself. So you may just casually say, hey, what do you think about this position? Tell us about yourself, expecting to be just a brief kind of answer, and then you as a hiring manager or recruiter kind of jumping on other questions. But then the candidate might be just starting kind of telling everything about themselves, all the single detail that might not even be relevant, or just bringing some irrelevant topics or other competencies that don't have much sense in the context of this interview. So practicing this question is really important. Just an opening statement that again will kind of tell the interviewer about what next they may ask. So and always consider an interview to be really a conversation. It shouldn't be like your monologue all the way. Where possible, kind of pause and kind of ask the question back so you can kind of bounce off each other. Ideally, again, these things really help you stand out against other candidates in your situation. Now, the other question that seems to be again omnipresent nowadays is the question of how do you use AI? And I do recommend, as for other typical questions, have your story ready. You don't necessarily have to memorize every single word, but have the structure of what you're going to tell about this and that, especially about AI. If you ask, you may tell about things about how you use AI tools in your day work as a BA to help you with productivity, like maybe working with meeting notes or proofreading the text or emails and things like that. If you happen to work on a project that had AI capabilities, functional capabilities, bring that as well. It's always, talking about those buzzwords that happen to be, the industry always helps in the interview process. Okay. Now, and a few others that again we see quite typical, especially for senior and lead BA roles, the conflicting priorities and various stakeholder opinions. Through those questions, not only they want to elicit kind of your knowledge of the methods, but also kind of some interpersonal skills and your attitude toward navigating certain people situation. Okay. And obviously the scope management and change requests. This is something that, again, especially for lead BA and senior BA role, happens to be pretty much omnipresent there. Okay. Now, there are a few other questions, I believe, here. Yeah, about the interns, opportunity for business to benefit. Yeah, and you say that, yeah, should be some kind of a compensation there. Yeah, I believe in that as well. And then there's another comment here. I was told to address the tell us about yourself like an elevator pitch. Absolutely. So as I say, it shouldn't be like your monologue for like, minutes and minutes and minutes, like 10 minutes you're talking about yourself. It should be like, that's what I do. If you're applying for a technical BA role, highlight that technicality in that elevator pitch, but don't bring all the details. Just kind of highlight certain things you want that employer to know about you, and then use the opportunity, further down the road in the interview to talk about more details that you find important. Okay. There are other questions here. What do you think about accepting a lower salary for a job that might put you back on the market after a gap or offer a new experience? It's always an individual question that an individual need to come to terms with. I think from an employer standpoint, again, I'm speaking from my kind of personal experience here and my personal kind of point of view here. If an employer right away knows that they're lowballing you, I don't think they gaining an employer that will stand for that organizational long term. At any given opportunity, the first opportunity, you'll be looking for another job, and no one wants that situation. So it's I don't think I have a really good solution to that. I think everybody should be on an individual level consider that for themselves, consider their own personal financial situation, whether that's the moment they need to be accepting that lower salary and comparing with other options they have. So yeah, but it's a very good question. I'm wondering what other people think in the chat. If you happen to have a point of view on what Dana has just asked, put that in the chat. Okay. Okay. Now, sounds good. Now, a quick teaser here. If you happen to be in a situation where you're trying various, various things, and it just doesn't seem to work well for you in the interviewing process, just want to let you know that later in this presentation, I'll be giving you a free gift for hanging out with me, which is going to be a free consultation, just as I help many, many, many other BAs to stand out in the interviewing process and how I can help you. So stick around for that. We're going to talk about that later in this presentation. Now, tell me about what has been the weirdest question you've been asked in a job interview. Like the other day, I shared a situation where a long time ago, I was asked to sell a watch, which to this day, I can't think of a reason why I would want the BA in an interview situation to answer such a question, because it's hard for me to find any relevancy between things like sell a watch or sell a pen and things like that with what BAs do. I believe there's so many other ways and methods to understand and elicit kind of how the thought process of a BA kind of looks and works, and whether they will be a good part of the team. But yeah, I'm just wondering what has been your experience with kind of weird or kind of strange questions in a job interview setting. Okay, sounds good. Let's move on. Now, I know that especially in this time and age, in the job market that we're facing here, it's so usual that candidates just don't hear back from neither recruiter nor the hiring manager, obviously, and it's hard for you to understand what you did wrong, right? So ghosting, unfortunately, is a very typical situation, and I kind of feel like, even though I hate to say it, that's okay. Because the way I look at it, there are things that you may control, there are things you may not control. There are things that are outside of your control. You cannot control, what is the culture of the organization you're applying for? What is the culture of providing feedback? The same with the recruiting team. But what you can control, obviously, is how you show up for the interview, how you show up with asking for feedback from the recruiter if you didn't hear back for a few days. That way you can do. So I always recommend to proactively reach out and ask for feedback. Don't expect, that feedback will be shared with you right away. You would want it to happen, but it might not be the case. So there's nothing wrong with just, asking for, politely of, how did the interview go? What next steps you should expect. Okay. And again, it's not the situation where you need to be really hard on yourself. Hey, I did something wrong. There are things that are outside of your control. Also, I heard recently with another mentee of mine where there were so many rounds of interviews, and then at some point, the hiring company decided to go with an internal candidate. It's a very common situation. So again, things like that you cannot control. What you can control is how you show up constantly with the method that you have for applying and then handling the interviews. That will help you be successful in the long run. Okay. Okay. There's other, yeah. I was asked to say how much I was earning in my previous job. That's a weird question. I don't think I've ever heard of this, but yeah, I'm wondering how you applied. Okay. Good. Now, ideally, in this kind of multi-step, multi-stage hiring situation, you get to the point where everything was done well by you and everything went well. You get to the point of a job offer. Even though, again, there are things that are outside of your control. Sometimes, those offers get, withdrawn, and we all hear and read about such situations. But in kind of normal, I would say, flow of events, you get this job offer that kind of lists out your duties and also the compensation information. Oftentimes, people think that they may not renegotiate the compensation at this stage. And in the majority of the situations, that's right. However, if during the interviewing process, you heard about potentially new or additional duties compared to what the organization requested in the job listing, right? Or you heard something from the recruiter, or the job offer itself kind of contains certain wording that make you like think, hey, will I be asked to do much more? And therefore, if you get the sense of the additional duties in the normal market, I would say you are able to, and you have the right to ask whether there's a room for renegotiating your compensation. Also, if you see the number that's being offered to you, can really lower that the number that you put forward when the conversation about compensation happened earlier. However, it's always really like a thin ice you're working here. You need to understand that. If you don't feel strong enough about your case, and you don't feel strong enough about bringing the argumentation to negotiate additional other number here, I wouldn't recommend you doing this. Again, especially in the market where things change, dramatically, and there's so many things you cannot control here. But I would say there's always a room, again, given your profile and you're really able to stand out, you feel confident in your abilities, and you also heard things during the interviewing process that really deviate from the original duties you were expected to do. Okay, and I hope that makes sense. Now, before we kind of talk about some recommendations I have for you, I wanted to also debunk some of the myths that I see, again, omnipresent in the BA community and actually other roles that I happen to chat with. Myth number one is that still a lot of people think that just having a good resume, a great resume, will land you a job. And therefore, they try to kind of fit everything, all the experience in that one resume, right? And that leads to the situation where you have multi-pages of resume, all packed with useful information, however, not necessarily helping you to communicate it to the recruiter, who is going to be the first point of of the person looking at your resume, to really understand whether or not you're a good match here. And also, some folks think that just having a good resume means that now you don't need to work on your interviewing skills and ability to answer those questions, like tell us what you're doing, like tell us about yourself and things like that, and do the homework about the organization. So don't kind of fall kind of the victim of that myth, just thinking, hey, I have a resume and people need to hire me right away. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's a multi-step process where, again, you really need to understand where you're at and how do you react to various kind of requirements that the recruiter or the hiring manager may put in you, depending on the stage that you're at. So think about that. Now, the second myth is that, and I know where it's coming, but the idea that you need to be applying to those like 50, like 100 positions a day, it just doesn't make any sense. What you'll end up doing just sending over the same resume to everybody without tailoring it or adjusting to very specific requirements of the job posting, which will result in the recruiter opening up your generic resume, not finding any keywords or matches, and looking at the other resumes that do match, and you got rejected at this stage. And also think about that kind of burnout aspect of it. You will have to, think through and look through those multiple job postings a day, and you'll be sending over those generic resumes without tailoring them to specific needs. And then, that leading to you being rejected constantly. That, again, just from the kind of overall moral standpoint for you, you wouldn't feel well about it. So I would never recommend sending that many resumes a day. Just make sure that you tailor your specific resume to the needs of the position. That will highly increase your chances of getting noticed. Now, another myth, on the contrast, is that your resume must fit on one page. I never believed in that particular, that you have to fit everything in one page. However, I think there's something to it. You need to be really concise with your resume. So I would say 2.5, but it doesn't have to be the limit that you have in mind. Just wherever it feels right, put something in your resume, specific technology or certain achievement, do that. It just you don't have to kind of fall for that idea of putting everything into your resume so it grows to like 20 pages. And on the contrast, just having it very brief and generic without specific keywords, just fitting everything in one page does not necessarily help. So I think you just need to be really reasonable about what exactly you're putting into your resume there. Now, about the certifications, and some folks say that, oh, you have to have those BA certifications to land a job. It is rarely where the certifications are listed as must-have requirements in job postings. There are some exceptions, obviously, but oftentimes, if you look at it, certain certifications are listed as optional for a particular job. Exceptions might be where you apply for a platform-related business analysis work, let's say a Salesforce business analyst or SAP Commerce and others, right? Those positions might require you to have certifications. But talking about more of a generic kind of IBA-related certifications, it is not common to see those listed as must-haves. Therefore, again, if you're currently in the position of looking for a job, I don't think that your first and foremost focus should be on getting the certification to stand out. Obviously, it's a nice to have, and it may open you certain doors, but I would not consider this to be a must-have requirement. Okay. Now, and as far as referrals, some folks say that you have to have referrals to guarantee the job, and especially that thinking, and again, I don't know where it's coming from, where to increase your chances of landing a job in a particular organization, you need to be reaching out to people on LinkedIn, just adding them to your list of contact, and then asking them to refer you for a job. I never believed in that, and to me, that's really weird. Unless you really know someone, there's a friend of yours or ex-colleague of yours that works there, that to me kind of makes sense. But other than that, I can't believe why that can be even remotely successful for you. I think you can just, get the opposite reaction, I would say, like why you're trying to reach out people who never heard of you and asking them to refer you. That's kind of, again, that's sort of weird. And I never understood why that is something that some folks recommend. So that's kind of weird. Now, tell me, if you're currently looking for a job, if you're in a situation where you're open for opportunities, and also if you happen to be in a hiring situation right now, you're looking for a talent, put that in the chat as well. Okay. I know that some of my friends are kind of looking for opportunities. So if that's something that may help you stand out and kind of get noticed here, and maybe have some people reaching out to you, just use that opportunity as well. Now, before we drop, I wanted to give you something as a free gift for hanging out with me today. Now, the first thing is that on my website, bacareermentor.com, there's a resources section. There are a ton of free materials out there you can download, and you can kind of watch those recordings out there. There are things I want to particularly point out here. First is the career development training. It's another webinar recording where I go in depth about the career success strategies for BAs. How do you go from the junior BA position to a lead BA position and beyond, and what requires you to be successful in every step of the way. So make sure to check it out. There are also downloadable resources like my Scrum checklist or a discovery checklist. So things like that will help you in your current situation, current position. The free downloadable resources that I expect will highly benefit you. Secondly, though, and that's a free gift that I was mentioning earlier, as my way of saying thank you for sticking around with me today, I would like to give you an opportunity to scale a free BA job consultation related to job search or hiring process with me. It's going to be a short consultation, but I think that will definitely help you just to get a sense of where you're doing something right. And what I usually do ask for those, if you happen to scale, that's something of your interest, just reach out to me before the session, share with me anything I need to know about your particular situation so I can get prepared. In ideal, we can take a look at your resume, at the positions you're applying for, and maybe I'll be able to look at those materials of yours and say, whether or not you're doing something right or wrong, and maybe I can recommend you something. So jump on this opportunity. The only thing is that this calendar link will only be available today and tomorrow. So again, if this is something that you're interested in and you feel like I can help, scan that QR code or use that link down below and schedule this consultation with me. Okay. Now, the other things that I have for you now, if you're all about crafting your hands-on skills, because I'm all about that as well, I actually happen to have an Azure DevOps class. It's going to be a live training. It's going to happen twice next week, on Wednesday and then on Saturday, only to accommodate your busy schedule and the different time zones that we have in this group. If this is something that you're interested in, so I definitely recommend you jumping on this opportunity to get that hands-on skill. Because as we see, Azure DevOps really replaces Jira oftentimes in many organizations. So as a BA, you can't afford just not really knowing what that tool is all about. Now, there are definitely a lot of things that come along with this training. As you go through that QR code and scan through it and look at the page, you'll find all the details out there. But I want to highlight that there'll be tons of exercises out there. And again, if that's something that you wanted to get from certain classes where you couldn't get, like, hands-on expertise of how you write a story, how do you put the backlog together, or boards in Azure DevOps, that's going to be your opportunity. Now, the bad news is that the early bird discount that we had for this training actually expired like 2 weeks ago. But the good news is that I kind of moved it back for 2 days, today and tomorrow. So if that's something that you're interested in, then again, I'm highly encouraging you to take this opportunity. Now, we only have one spot available for Wednesday, and we have 2 spots available for Saturday. So again, if that's something that you've been thinking of, today is the best time to sign up for the training. Okay. Now, let's move on with the rest of the presentation here today. Now, what you can do in the situation that we're all in, this turbulent market and things like that. First is to practice those interview questions that we talked about earlier. But also there are certain steps that you can follow, again, to help you stand out in various steps of the process, be it the screening interview or the hiring interview. And I'm listing those here just to summarize here, and feel free to kind of capture the screenshot, or if you're watching the recording to press and pause here. But really, first and foremost, make sure that you don't kind of follow that advice of like 50 resumes a day you need to submit. You need to submit tailored resumes that really match your expertise to what the job listing is asking for. And make sure you list out those keywords that the job posting has, so that, again, your resume really stands out against the crowd. Okay. Now, as far as the resumes, again, use the bullet lists, use PDF and Word formats, again, to help pass that ATS step as possible. Now, as far as screening interview, again, remember that oftentimes it is to highlight or identify some red flags that the recruiter might have against you. So be ready to answer questions like, maybe frequent job hopping, or salary expectations, or again, any other interpersonal questions that may be asked. It is important to demonstrate that not only your resume matches the job posting, but also you would be a good fit as a candidate for this role. And of course, as far as the hiring interview goes, again, make sure that you do your homework and you do your research of the organization. And then during the interview itself, you are able to tailor the answers to what the company does, their products, their recent presentations, what you heard about them. It is, again, something that really helps you to stand out against the other candidates that interviewing team may be having conversations with. I hope that makes sense for you. And I'm wondering, what your experience thus far has been with the with interviewing and recruiting process here. Okay. Good. Now, as we wrap it up, and I think we're perfectly good on time, again, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. And also, if we are not yet connected on LinkedIn, send me over the connection request or follow me, and let's talk. Now, I'm going to scan through other questions here in the chat that I didn't have opportunity to answer. But again, meanwhile, Also, jump on this opportunity to have a free consultation with me. Today, tomorrow is the time to scale. And the same applies to the Azure DevOps training that's going to be happening next week, Wednesday and Saturday, 2 separate sessions. Again, if you want to enjoy that beautiful pricing here that you see here, today and tomorrow is the time to scale that. Awesome. Let me scan through some other questions here. I find salary negotiation really awkward. Do you have any tips for how to navigate such discussion? That's a great question. I actually do have a YouTube video where I go in depth on how you can do your salary research so that you have numbers ready when you ask. Even if you don't know, like, what's going to be my range, how much you're worth, you can do the research at a certain resources you may look through to get those numbers ready. Especially if you happen to be like in North America, there are some resources that just list out those numbers out there. But yeah, and I feel like, people don't like talk about money for one reason or another. I don't know why. Money is everywhere. And therefore, having your story ready for like that money question is absolutely natural. Should be natural to you. And that's why, again, I believe in the power of preparation and repetition if needed. So having those answers prepared for you in advance will really help you navigate that question really in a really good manner. Okay. Good. Cool. I don't think we have any other questions that we didn't cover today. Now, as always, thank you for being such a wonderful audience. If something pops up where you think, oh, hey, maybe there's a question I didn't ask in this chat, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn right away. I'm happy to take your questions. And as always, reach out to me if you have any other questions related to BA work. I'll be happy to help. Now, as you're looking at these QR codes here, again, feel free to reach out to me if you have additional questions about this BA consultation or the Azure DevOps training. I'll be happy to answer those as well. Okay, cool. Now, just scanning through the questions here. Yeah, it doesn't seem that we have anything else here for this session. Again, thank you so much for sticking around with me today. Have a great day. Talk to you soon. Goodbye.